Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final Salebox for the 29th of June 2014. Today we're going to round up some of the hidden games that were not featured on the front page and yet have very heavy discounts and are also great games in their own right. The sale today is more of a rehash, so it's just a bunch of stuff that's been on there before, so there's really nothing much to say about that other than buy brothers, buy brothers, buy brothers, and buy brothers. But outside of that, there are a bunch of pretty good games at very heavy discounts that you probably haven't seen, because again, they've got nowhere near the front page, and these days it's kind of difficult for any of those games to do well unless they hit the front page, because the sale is difficult to navigate, let's just put it that way. So let's give you a chance to check out some of these titles. They're all extremely cheap, very, very cheap indeed with heavy discounts, and they're all worth your time. So let's begin with Adventures of Shuggy, 90% off. Ridiculously cheap. Like, it's 50 cents if you're in the US. When I'm saying cheap, I really do mean cheap. What is it? It's an arcade-style platformer with a lot of levels. It's really as simple as that. The whole point is collect all the gems, move on to the next level, and there's a lot of levels, but there is also a bit of a time rewind mechanic in there, so a little bit of braid tossed in there for good measure. It's a nicely designed little experience, and some of the levels get extremely challenging later on, so if you're looking for something that might remind you of days gone by when the only priority seemed to be to get as many gems as humanly possible and move on to the next level, then that's what Adventures of Shuggy actually is. It's elegantly designed, though. You gotta give them a lot of credit for that. Defy Gravity Extended, also 90% off. It wasn't actually expensive to begin with. This is quite literally 30 cents or your regional equivalent. I'm gonna be honest, the game looks initially like complete and total arse. It's not a beautiful game at all. Its aesthetic is particularly weak, but it's the mechanics that really make this game interesting. It is about manipulating gravity with a gravity gun that can do gravity repulsion as well as gravity attraction. Lot of levels. There's 24 initially, and then there's a quest mode that unlocks, which gives you another 24 after that. And the game is quite tense and pretty satisfying, honestly. If you're looking for something that involves messing around with physics in order to get where you need to go, then Defy Gravity Extended is just that. It is very bare bones graphically, but the actual gameplay itself is highly satisfying. Retrograde, also 90% off. This game did not do very well, and I feel that that is extremely unfortunate. This is a shooter in reverse. You actually start by winning, except by doing so you're actually losing, and you need to rewind absolutely everything that's been done. And it's done so by flying backwards and sucking up all your shots again. How is that done? Via fairly familiar rhythm game mechanics. This is really fun, actually. Very, very enjoyable with good music and a really nice aesthetic. And it did terribly. And that's really, really sad. So I think now perhaps would be the time to grab it. It costs next to nothing. If you like rhythm games, then you will very much enjoy Retrograde, although it does simultaneously also melt your brain in the process. The main problem I have with it is that it was really designed to be used with a Guitar Hero controller, yeah? And if you play the higher difficulties with a keyboard, it can be a little bit too difficult. But on the regular difficulty, it's actually a very enjoyable experience. The only other real problem I had with it is just how busy the background is, which can make it a little bit trickier to actually hit the notes properly and not get horribly confused with where you're going. But at that price, there's really no argument. If you have even a passing interest in rhythm games, then Retrograde is a really unique experience. Capsized, 80% off. Well worth it. It is a nice little Metroidvania game set on an alien planet by Alien Trap Games. It's got a decent amount of combat going for it, a decent amount of exploration. It also uses a kind of gravity leash kind of thing in order to allow you to swing from the top of caverns and also manipulate various parts of the environment like giant blocks and pull them around and all that kind of thing. But the game itself is very enjoyable if you're into the whole Metroidvania style of doing things, exploration, a little bit of backtracking, not a huge amount, but some very creative and very colorful worlds going on with that. The art style's maybe not for everybody. It does certainly look like it was drawn with colored pencil, which some people are probably not going to dig, but personally I found Capsized to be pretty enjoyable for the genre, and I'm not really a huge fan of that particular genre, but it's nicely put together, and for that price it's hard to argue with. Rock of Ages, 80% off. It's bowling with a large boulder. It's also a little bit of tower defense, a little bit of marble madness, a little bit of Monty Python. It's from the crazed minds behind Xenoclash, and in my opinion, it's a much better game than Xenoclash. Not only is it extremely funny, and the cutscenes alone are worth watching, but it's actually highly challenging, and you can get upgrades for your boulders as well as upgrades for your own defense, because you must defend against the opposing historical figures' boulders, as well as roll your own down the course in order to smash the gates of their fortress and destroy them forever. Rock of Ages is absolutely hilarious. Really, really good. And it's worth it for that price, without a doubt. Rochard, whatever the hell you want to call it, also 80% off. This is a very capable action platformer with a few puzzle elements involving gravity, a gravity gun, and a very gruff and jaded space construction worker. It's a good sci-fi shooter with some decent puzzle elements in it, and a rather nice graphic style. It's really hard to argue with most of the features. It's just one of those rock-solid games that doesn't really have a lot wrong with it, but is perhaps hampered simply by its genre and the fact that there are so many other games in said genre. But I would encourage you perhaps to get past those preconceptions and give it a shot. It's got a nice mix of puzzle solving, action, platforming, and shooting aliens in the face. And really in life, is that not what we should be striving for? Well, it's a good game regardless, and again, extremely cheap. Marlow Briggs and the Mask of Death, 80% off. Wow. You know, this game actually surprised me a lot because it has no right to be anywhere near as good as it actually is. This looked like a blatant God of War ripoff, and it kind of is. Like, it does feel quite similar to God of War, there's no doubt, but what it does is it takes an unlikely protagonist, puts them in an even more unlikely situation, and goes full-on ridiculous action movie with it. Plenty of hours of spectacle fighting, third-person action, some platforming and the occasional QTE that you have to worry about, but for the most part, a really fun and extremely cheesy experience that actually has a good amount of humor in it. It knows what it is. It knows exactly what it is. It is a full-on B-movie video game. And surprisingly enough, it actually does its job very, very well indeed. And it's worthy of your time, especially at that price. Trine 2, The Complete Story, 85% off. I'll recommend Trine until the end of bloody time, because it is absolutely beautiful. If you want something that says to people, hey, you know, video games kind of works of art, Trine 2 is a damn work of art. It is a mythical and fantastical fairy tale adventure with 3 unique characters that you can switch between in the single player, or of course play with all 3 in the multiplayer co-op, which is online this time around. The original game didn't actually have that. But Trine 2 is just gorgeous. It's incredibly well realized. I will say that you can kind of break a lot of the puzzles with the wizard, but even then there are some amazing places to explore, and there's a lot more combat in this one than the previous, and the combat's also far more fleshed out with more weapons and abilities for each of the various characters. It is beautiful. It is absolutely fantastic. A modern classic. And the complete edition comes with extra content in the form of the Goblin Menace DLC and the Dwarven Caverns level. Also, the 3-pack is discounted 85% off as well, so if you want to save a few dollars and get 3 copies to split between your friends to play, that is by far the best way to go. Sword of the Stars, The Pit, 75% off. So this is a roguelike in the classic sense of the word, as in monsters only move when you do, permadeath, inventory system, upgrades, all that kind of thing. It's really well realized, and it's actually set in the future, which is fairly unusual for most roguelikes that are set kind of in fantasy worlds. The Pit is extremely challenging. It's got a hell of a lot of replayability and a good amount of depth to it as well. The DLC expansions are pretty good, but they're not as heavily discounted, so do bear that in mind. And you are probably better off just grabbing the base game to begin with and then going from there. It is not for everybody, which, you know, is every game in existence, so it's kind of a pointless statement, but in this case, simply because it leans towards the more old school way of doing roguelike games, it may frustrate you at times. It is difficult. You are very short on ammo and health pretty much all the time. Sometimes you may believe the game is acting unfairly, and it's entirely possible. Roguelikes have a tendency to do that. But if you are willing to persist, then I think you'll find a very enjoyable and rewarding experience at the end of it, after maybe 20 or 30 deaths. Half Minute Hero, 75% off. This is a bit of a weird one, to say the least. If you're looking for something unique, then this is exactly how I would describe Half Minute Hero. So the idea behind Half Minute Hero is you have 30 seconds to save the world in a streamlined JRPG, where you level up, you explore the land, and you beat the boss all within 30 seconds. It's a bit manic, to say the least. And it also comes with various different ways to play that change the playstyle almost entirely. The regular mode is a case of you go into a fight, you will run into an enemy, you will kill it, you go on to the next fight. But there are other modes, including the princess mode, where you will go around with a kind of machine gun crossbow and a large group of bodyguards. It's really hard to explain unless you've played it, and you probably should play it as well. The one thing I would say is that the keyboard controls are not that brilliant. They take some getting used to. It's actually almost like playing an old-school JRPG on a keyboard with an emulator, and you'll have to mess around a little bit to really get that going. The port is not incredible, although for that price, it's simply hard to argue with. It has a great sense of humor going for it, and it can be highly challenging. It's all about optimizing your runs, and I think you will find it very unique, and there's not really anything else like it, with the exception, of course, of Half Minute Hero 2, which is also on PC, but just somewhat pricier than this one. The Puppy Games Ultrabundle, 75% off. So this is the only bundle in the sale that's kind of been hidden away that I really think is absolutely worth your money. And it consists of 4 titles made by Puppy Games, who I have a great deal of respect for. They take a bunch of older titles, they put a little bit of a modern spin on it, not too much, and they present it with this absolutely gorgeous neo-retro graphic style that looks absolutely fantastic. The bundle consists of Revenge of the Titans, which I think is probably the strongest title in there. It's a spin on a tower defense. They also have Ultratron, Droid Assault, and Titan Attacks, which is a nice spin on Space Invaders. Also comes with the soundtrack and a sandbox mode for Revenge of the Titans. They did make a couple of changes to Revenge of the Titans that I didn't necessarily like. They made it maybe a little bit easier, but the games are still very, very fun, and I think you'll get a good couple of hours out of each of them. The bundle is really, really good value. And finally, Pineapple Smash Crew, 80% off. I did sing the praises of this game without question. It is by a single guy. His name is Rich Mate Game, and it is kind of hard to describe, actually. It's a little bit cannon fodder-esque. That's probably the best way to do it, although it's a little bit faster and much more arcade-orientated. You control a group of 4 Space Marines on procedurally generated levels, and the big thing about this game is there's a large selection of grenade types that you can use, including things like teleportation grenades, vortex grenades, and all manner of different things. And you can kind of combo the grenades together in order to create various different combinations, which will result in large explosions and an awful lot of fun going forward. The game was perhaps a little bit lacking in content when it came out, but at this price, much, much easier to justify, as I said before. Worth noting, of course, is the phenomenal soundtrack by Cyphus, which is well worth listening to in its own right, and that if you name your Marine TotalBiscuit, he will get himself a top hat. So there you go. Alright folks, that pretty much wraps me up for the list of hidden gems. There are a few more, of course, but I would be on all day if I went through all of them. There's a nice little thread you can find on the Steam forums, and of course if you head over to the site steamdb.info/sales, you will be able to list by discount, so you might find a few things that I missed, but those are 12 games that I would recommend without question at that price, and hopefully you do enjoy them. Bear in mind the Steam sale will wrap up tomorrow. Usually when it says to the 30th, that means it stops on the 30th, not that there'll be a final day. So as far as I'm concerned, this is the last day of the sale, so now's the time to pick up whatever you can, otherwise you will miss out. I'll see you next time.